welcome to the Running for Souls podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I'm really grateful to have you along listening in today whenever it is that you get around to listening to this, wherever it is that you are when you're listening. I hope you're out there somewhere, walking, running, taking in nature, somehow finding some peace in this really challenging time of social distancing and social isolation, and just really battling some of the fears and anxieties that I understand that many of you are feeling right now. And really, this conversation I have today with Kate Fletcher, I'm not sure there could be a better conversation to have during this time. And I kind of knew that going in because this is the third time Kate and I have had the chance to get together on this podcast and have meaningful conversations. Every year, Kate takes on a big running challenge to support some of her underprivileged students up in Louisa County. Students she knows are completely capable of going on to college and extending their education, but sadly in many cases don't have the resources some other students do to pursue that education. So a long time ago it got put on Kate's heart to use running to raise money for some of those scholarships. And really that effort is just the outflow of who she is and what her heart is all about. And a lot of that is just the way this relationship she has with struggle in her life, the way she has used struggle in her life, the way she perceives the benefit of struggle in her life. And I think right now we can all relate one way or another to struggle. And because of that, I think you're going to find some real meaning out of this conversation I have with Kate. So I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to my conversation with Kate Fletcher. I want to welcome back. Actually, I think this is your third time. So welcome back, Kate Fletcher, to the Running for Souls podcast. So welcome, Kate.
Hi, nice to be here for the third time.
Yes. And so now, so you're a teacher. So how are you doing with this whole stranded stay-at-home thing in the teacher world? I mean, you've got students, and so how's that sitting with you?
Right. Well, our school system has been rightly concerned with equity. So we are not able to give assignments that in any way require the use of the internet. So we're not using Zoom, for instance, with our students, at least not as a requirement. And that's because so many students in the county where I teach do not have reliable internet access. And I know this is a concern across the country, but I am proud to work for a county that is really genuinely caring enough about our students, each and every one of our students, to recognize that what we give to some, we have to give to all. And if we can't provide internet access to everybody, then we need to find an alternative way to reach all of our students, which is what we're trying to do. So the work that we give to our students is getting to them through the US mail at this point. We are putting together packets of assignments that are meant to be useful to them at this time and to help them hold on to gains that they made throughout the school year. As an English teacher, I feel like I'm very fortunate in that I can choose short stories and poems for them to read, but I don't have to choose every short story and every poem ever written. Whereas I imagine as maybe a math teacher, I still have to cover every kind of equation. I can give a sample as an English teacher. I can say, here, read some of these poems and read these stories, and give rather loose, open-ended creative writing assignments. And they are essentially doing what they need to be doing, which is reading, thinking, and writing. Whereas if I was a teacher that was required to teach them trigonometry, I think I might be a little bit more hemmed in with more requirements on me, so that when they went into the next level of mathematics next year, they would know everything they needed to know. It's just not really like that for my subject in a way that probably makes it a little bit less stressful for me as an English teacher.
Yeah, no, and well, first, I mean, I don't envy any school administrator trying to figure this out, no matter where you are, how you're trying to do it. I just can't imagine the challenges with it, which no matter where you are, we're in challenging times. But, I've said this, that even these school districts that are trying to do all of this online, in the end, they're going to be stuck with the same challenge on the other side of that, because whether you own it up front that there's inequalities around this access, if you don't own it up front, you're going to have to own it on the other side, because even if you put these assignments out there, on the other side of it, you're going to find out a lot of people couldn't keep up with it because they didn't have access. So either way,
Right.
you're going to have to rectify this whenever we get back to doing school like we do it in person with the teachers. I just don't think there's going to be much difference between the folks like your district who's said we're not going to try this whole online thing, and the districts that did, because again, it's a reality, and obviously that inequality is different depending on where you are. I don't think it's absent anywhere. So you're going to have to. What are you going to do with the kids? But I didn't even set that up to be a segue, but it turns out to be a segue, because that's kind of your deal. You are a fighter for trying to help out students who may not have, access to the kind of education that that they not only deserve, but they're capable of pursuing. So you and I have talked the last 2 years when we've got together. We have talked about your Kate's Lions Pride annual run, and I think the first year we talked, you ran 400 laps around the high school track, which was 100 miles. The year before, I think you had run 50 miles. Last year, you changed it up a little bit and just ran to all 6 of the schools in your county. And this year, you ran from Louisa to the state capitol in downtown Richmond. You're doing all of these runs are to raise money for scholarships for some folks who might not otherwise get a chance to go to college. So I want to talk about, I always get curious where your mindset is when you pick these runs every year.
Yeah.
So how did we get this year's version? How did we get let's run to the state capitol? Where did that all come from?
Well, it always seems to start with a joke, because it always seems impossible when the idea first occurs. And this time the joke came from Carrie Hicks, who is the brains of the run. My joke that I always make is that she's the brains and I'm the brawn, that she does all of the behind the scenes work with her students. She's the leader of 2 groups of students, a newspaper class and a leadership class at Louisa County High School. And the students and Miss Hicks do everything except run it. Really, all I'm left to do is run the distance. And it was Carrie Hicks who was on a field trip last spring with her young daughter to the state capitol. She was a chaperone for an elementary school field trip. And she sent me a picture of the Capitol stairs and said, wrote, "Next year's Lion Pride run, ha ha," laughing emoji kind of message. And just like all of the other times when we have speculated about the next year's run, it really did just feel funny, a joke. But then, of course, as always happens, we began to think, well, wait a minute, it's exactly 50 miles. I've certainly run 50 miles before. And last year, I ran just shy of 40 miles going to each school in the county, and I had a police escort. This would only be another 10 or so miles, and we would use police escorts again, which we have some experience with now. And suddenly it went from funny to totally doable. And then, as always, we've just been so fortunate that everything has fallen into place. And again, I would give credit to Carrie Hicks and all those kids, because they're really the ones that make it all fall into place, and the entire community of Louisa. which I hope we spend some time just talking about community in this conversation, because where we are right now with COVID-19, I think we're all missing that sense of community. And Louisa is certainly a place that knows how to live together, and everyone came together. The sheriff's department, of course, all the people that support the run financially did it yet again. We're called upon. The small businesses, the very same small businesses that are now in a lot of difficulty with our current situation. So everyone did what they do in Louisa County and came together and made it happen. And then we were able to get the same assistance from Hanover and Henrico as well, and Richmond City, because we needed police escorts in those districts too. And they also rose to the occasion. And then the people at the Capitol, the politicians, those people also were willing and were supportive. And so it was it truly was a beautiful thing that it happened.
So I want to touch on a couple of things there. Let's go back then to Louisa. What do you think it is about this race and this endeavor that makes it so easy for the Louisa community to rally around?
Well, I think, and I see this probably as a little bit of, I hate to use the word outsider because I know they would say, you're not an outsider, Miss Fletcher, but the truth is I'm not from Louisa. I'm originally not from the United States. I'm from Canada. I made my way from Vancouver, Canada, then to Northern Virginia and college in Massachusetts. And my parents are both immigrants from England. And they split up when I was relatively young, and my family was always in England. And so I do not come from a place like Louisa. That was very foreign to me, a small town. Just not something that was in my experience. And when I started working there 15 years ago, I think because it was so different from the way I had, been an individual in a larger community of people, it just wasn't my experience of the social world. I think it has maybe stood out to me even more. The people in that community truly rely on each other and truly love each other and support each other. And that's true in the school system, and it's true in the wider community. And they've taught me things that I definitely did not know about how people can be there for each other. And it sounds so simple. It sounds so obvious. And I hope I don't sound like I'm just speaking cliches, but it's one thing to say it and to offer it as an idea. It's another thing to actually live it. And I think, and I'm sure this is true of communities all across the country, people who grow up in a place and are connected to, literally the soil and the woods and the land of that place, spend time with their neighbors and their cousins and their grandparents, and find ways to love their neighbors in ways that some of us who come from big cities aren't accustomed to. I think the idea of supporting someone who's going to run to the Capitol building as a way to help the seniors in the local high school seems totally natural to them. I think yes, it's a wacky idea, and it maybe the idea of that running that far seems a bit wacky, but the concept of helping and pitching in and being supportive it's their first inclination.
Well, and I get that. I say it all the time. So as part of my job with the state, I have to go visit communities all over the state. And one of my favorite places to go is Southwest Virginia. And I always say about the folks in Southwest Virginia, and, is the nature of some of the work we do at the state and the way funding is distributed. And we use an antiquated formula where the folks who have bigger populations, they get more money. and that's not Southwest Virginia, so they don't get much money to do a lot of the work that we ask them to do. But I always say that they are doing so much more per dollar, per every dollar we give them. And I think it's because they have this mentality that's just built into their communities that, this really isn't about the money. If you don't give us money, we're still taking care of each other. We have this, we've got each other's back. And so the money thing just becomes like something extra to help them live out this mentality they already have, where, when you start talking about the bigger cities where maybe they get bigger money, but it's just like a smaller portion of everything they've got anyway, it doesn't mean as much to them. And I'm not saying any of those areas aren't doing good things, but I just see in these smaller communities, there's this we have each other's back mentality.
Right. There isn't the same us versus them.
Right. Which is interesting though, because and I just thought about it as you were talking, because I'm picturing you, I know kind of the route you took. So you started in, rural Louisa there, and you came down through Hanover, I guess, which is still, that route's still somewhat rural, but it gets busier
Right.
as you get closer to the capital. So you kind of left the farm and headed to the big city. And I don't know, when you were running that 50 miles, was that even registering with you, or what was it? What was that route like?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you would bring that up. It actually occurred to me on a drive that Carrie Hicks and I did. She drove to where I live in Henrico County, because like I said, I don't live in Louisa. And then we drove the rest of the way to the capital. And actually where she met me was on our route. And it was just a mile or two from my house. So I ran within a mile or two of my own home, which is very strange because I've been driving 45 minutes to Louisa and back again every single day. Well, not weekends, but most days of my life for the last 15 years. And then to run all the way basically to my home and, then another 10 miles to get to the capital, 15 miles. That in itself was very strange. But on this drive with her, I did realize that, I don't know if you are familiar with the children's book, City Mouse, Country Mouse.
No.
And I did feel, both on the drive, it began to occur to me what it would be like. I was visualizing, oh gosh, I'm going to be running from such a rural place when I leave and down such empty, dark roads surrounded by woods and fields and my prediction was correct, the sounds of wildlife. There were coyotes yipping at one point. I was nervous that deer would jump out. There were times where I was just able to run right down the middle of the road. I felt so incredibly free and wild just to run down the middle of Route 33, which is a highway, but a very, in that part of Virginia, very rural, or running through a very rural part of the state. And to just run straight down the middle of the road in pitch blackness with the sounds of nocturnal animals around me was pretty surreal. And then to, of course, run through the suburbs when I hit Henrico County, and then into a very urban area, and finally the downtown of that urban area was pretty epic in its own way, and almost like it was almost like the passage of humanity, right? From like this journey we've gone on from being rural, from all belonging to rural societies, to agrarian societies, to this urban experiment that we've been having for, quite a long time at this point. But yeah, there was something really interesting that traced a larger passage that we've gone on as a society.
Yeah,
and during that 50 miles.
Yeah, and so for folks who don't know, so you left Louisa at night, right?
Right. Yes. So very late at night, a little after 11 p.m.
And then you arrived on the courthouse steps of the capital of Virginia sometime the next morning.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's a lot to that,
Yeah.
running through rural Virginia, pitch black, and then arriving in the busy downtown in the light of
Right.
day.
Yeah. So going from hearing coyote yips and, sensing foxes watching me from the edges of the forest to cars honking and people in their suits and of course homeless people on the street and politicians in the building where they do their thing. Just very interesting to see all those facets of human life going about, well, and non-human life going about their existence. And maybe especially strange to look at it now, just less than a month later, just from the time that I did that run to the lockdown was just a few weeks. And yet we had no knowledge of the lockdown that was coming when I ran. We weren't even at the point where we were washing our hands all the time. I think maybe there had been a few cases in Washington State, but it certainly wasn't really on our minds in Virginia. And now, of course, so much of that, everything that I saw on that journey, except of course the animals, but so much of the human part of that journey has been completely transformed in a matter of weeks.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's amazing in itself. This run, and I think probably Carrie and her classes had a lot to do with this, but this run got a lot of attention, and I'm not just talking local. I saw stories for this all over the state. How did that impact you, if at all? Like I said, and anybody listening, all you got to do is Google Kate's Lion Pride Run, and there'll be tons of stories, including the video of you marching up the steps of the Capitol with the Rocky theme song playing in the background. But this one seemed to get a lot more attention. I don't know if you want to talk about that, why that was, what it meant to you in terms of the run itself, to kind of have more people aware of what was going on.
Yeah, I think just taking it outside of the county where I teach and running to the Capitol, which is obviously symbolic for the larger Commonwealth of Virginia, we hoped would bring attention to the potential for young people all across the state and not just in one county, because obviously this run is to raise attention about the needs of young people to reach their potential. And it has always helped students in Louisa County and will continue to help students in Louisa County in terms of the actual scholarship funds and who those go to. But the message that we have so much potential inside of ourselves that we're not always able to realize, whether that's as runners or as students or just as human beings with all of our various passions, that message obviously is in no way limited to a particular county. And so by symbolically taking it to the Capitol, we were hoping to get not just young people, but everyone thinking about their own potential and what we can do to support each other to help all of us become better versions of ourselves.
Did it ever occur to you when you were running again in the night there from Louisa, hearing the coyotes and the wildlife, and then the steps of the Capitol of the state, did you think for a minute, all the way back, all those years ago, when you kind of took this on as an idea, that how on earth did I end up here on the Capitol steps running 50 miles from Louisa?
Yes, that has probably consciously occurred to me, but also is always lurking in the back of my mind. I think one of the things that I love about running is that, and it's not just running, this is true of so many parts of life, but this is just true of being human. We have the power to construct so much of our lives. So, 10 years ago, I wasn't even a runner. And then to make the decision, oh, I'm going to do this thing called running, and I'm going to do it every day until it begins to change the way I think and feel and act in the world. And then I'm going to focus this thing I do called running into something that could become an act of solidarity with my community to make change for these students by inspiring people to donate and raise scholarship funds. That we all have the power to create something out of what may not have been anything to us. Just for me, just 10 years ago, running meant nothing to me. It wasn't something I thought about. It wasn't something I did. It had no role in my life. And then to choose this path and to not know where it was going. I started running on the little track while my daughter played on the playground. I certainly had no idea where it would lead. I think that's really remarkable that we all have the power to choose to do something, even if we're not sure where it will lead at all, and then continue to follow that path and consciously create. It's a creative act. And I guess as someone who, before I became a runner, thought of creativity as something reserved for artists, and certainly as someone who has always been a writer, I thought of creativity as, for me, the act of writing. That was the way I would create. That was the way I would create my thoughts and viewpoints and beliefs, and potentially affect other people with my writing. And strangely, not that I haven't had any effect with my writing, because I hope I have, and certainly I've been a teacher of writing, and I hope that's had an impact on my students. But there are just so many ways to create and to be creative and to have an impact on the world, that it's one of the remarkable parts about being human, that it's very easy to forget that we have that power. And running is something that reminds me I have that power every day.
Well, it's interesting. So, and like is typical with you and I, like I'm now not going to go in order of some of the things I had written down, because we're at this place where I wanted to go at some point. And so it's sort of funny, but it's not, that I thought about this the other day. Like we're in Kate Fletcher's ideal running world right now. You and I joke that you've never been big into races. You run a couple a year, you have like your one you try to do, but you and I have joked before, races aren't your big thing. Garmin watch aren't your big thing. I think I have more people talk to me who've listened to our conversation, our first conversation, that I'll go on a big run, and they'll reach out and ask me how many pebbles I had to drop to keep track, referencing to our conversation where you said, I don't even use a watch. I just put pebbles in my pocket and collect them to keep track how far I've gone. But so we're in this place where a lot of runners who focus on races don't have them. Like there's not a race to be run anywhere in the world. You and I were talking before we started recording about the big online race last weekend, virtual race. But it is interesting that what I see a lot of people doing is they are doing some virtual runs, or they're doing some things to promote bigger causes. And like I've had these moments in my own life. Like I found myself in Honduras last summer.
Yes.
I would have never been there if I hadn't started running 6 years ago. And that's a really, really long story how starting running ended up there. But I would have never ended up in Honduras, in a place I said I would never go. And and by that I said I would never go outside the borders of this country. I just kind of like feel real safe here, and that was something I was never going to do. But I found myself there, and like you, if it was all created by this act of running. The first time I talked to you, you suggested this book to me, Born to Run, Christopher McDougall, and we've talked about this quote many times. I reflect on it a lot. He says that he had discovered this connection between the capacity to love and the capacity to love running.
Right.
And I've been wondering in this time, and let me say, one of the reasons that I've become so creative with running is there are a lot of really, really good people that embrace the sport of running. There's a lot of really, really good people who aren't in it to win races. In fact, I would argue most people aren't in it to win races because they're not going to win them. But I think in this time where races, and that's not even an option, you can't run for racing. I wonder if there's an opportunity for some people to rediscover sort of this capacity to love running, this capacity to find some creativity or some power or some capacity to build something out of their running bigger than themselves, like scholarships. I don't know, out of necessity or out of like just falling back in some searching. I don't have this race to train for, so now I'm just kind of running. Well, why am I running? I don't know. I thought about you. I've called this my own mind. This is Kate Fletcher's ideal running world. But I wonder if you've thought at all about any of that.
Yeah. Thank you. I makes me happy to think that when you get lost down those roads in your mind, that you see me standing on the side of the, or running beside you on the trail in your mind there. I have been thinking a great deal about the opportunity that we all have as human beings to reset, to change the way we were doing things, because what was habit and what was unconscious, now we're going to have a conscious choice. I think when we begin to return to some sort of new normal, we'll be able to choose, and it will feel like a conscious choice, whether we want to go back to doing this thing or the other thing. So, on a larger scale, that might be people choosing whether they want to go back to the work they were doing before this happened. So, and I should say, of course, that I'm incredibly privileged because I, at this point, have a job that is relatively secure and I'm not sick. So I say all of this in the context of recognizing how incredibly fortunate I am that I'm safe at home and that I continue to get a paycheck, which is helping me pay for my mortgage and keep me safe. And obviously, so many people are not in that, having that experience right now. So I'm always afraid, because I tend to be an optimistic person, that I'm going to come across as a Pollyanna, and I'm trying to keep that in check, and I don't want, that's not my intention at all. But if in some way people are able to use this as an opportunity to consciously choose what maybe they blindly did out of a sense of obligation or habit before, if they're able to re-examine the life they want to lead, then that seems like it could lead to positive change. And what does this have to do with running? Well, I think running every time is a small reset. So I know when I go for a run, it's a time when I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself. And honestly, that is probably there's probably a pretty simple physical explanation for that has to do with when there's that kind of physical effort happening, when your feet are pounding on a trail or pavement and your heart rate is elevated and breathing is in itself an effort, I think we are able to reset and escape our normal mind patterns, that we're able to get out of that groove and separate a little bit from our perception of ourselves as this isolated individual and become part of something bigger. So if I'm in the woods and I'm running, I feel as if I'm part of, I know this, I don't know, I'm afraid to even say this out loud, but I feel like I'm a part of the forest, that I am more than just an individual human being with my isolated ego, moving through the world, separate from everybody else. I feel as if I'm part of this landscape that I'm in. And when I'm running with a group of people, or I'm running for a group of people, like when I'm doing the Lion Pride run each year, I feel as if I'm part of that larger community. I let go of my own ego a bit. And so there's this opportunity to reset every time I choose to go for a run. There's an opportunity to get out of my head. I mean, I guess that's the easier way to put it, that I get out of my head. I get out of my own little ego and feel as if I'm part of something bigger than myself. And I do think what we're going through right now as a result of, yes, something very frightening, COVID-19, because of this virus, I think we have a similar large scale opportunity to reset and to remind ourselves to really truly feel that we're big, that we're part of something bigger than our own solitary little life. And I realize that's kind of ironic, since right now we're feeling so isolated and alone. But at the same time, all of the structures that we're so used to, all of our habits that are so ingrained, are falling by the wayside, and we have an opportunity to reset the way we are.
So, wow. So there a couple of things there I want to dig deeper into. One, sort of in a, hey, thank you, you just helped me figure me out way. So for the past month, maybe 5 weeks now, I've been unable to run. And it's like, for the first time since I took up this thing, I've been dealing with the back and hip injury, going to physical therapy, and I've never been to physical therapy in my life. Like, I've been so lucky in running that outside of a day or two, I've never had anything happen where I couldn't run. And I mean, I have been lost without the running. In fact, I went to physical therapy today, and it's just like, I mean, I've been doing this for a month, and I'm to a place where I can walk comfortably now, almost. I can sleep okay, which I wasn't doing. But I told the physical therapist today, I was like, if it weren't for running, I probably wouldn't even come in here anymore, because I could suck it up and walk with a little pain, and I could get on with my life, but I can't get on with life without running. I need running. And I think it's that reset that I'm missing. Like, I've tried different things, sit down and read. I do a lot of writing too, and write, but it's like running has become this daily or almost daily place to just, I love how you said it, reset my life, get all of the noise out. And even though we're in a quieter space now, we're all kind of not in that work environment, and I'm sitting here talking to you. You can see me. I can't see you. I'm in an isolated office by myself, where you would think quiet, but it's not that kind of quiet that running gives you. It gets you to this place where you just run till you can't think about anything other than, like you said, your own breath you hear, your feet pounding. And I don't know, I always say it in terms of my faith. That's running made me a much better prayer partner with God. And the main reason is because it shut me up, and I quit talking to him and allowed me a space to listen instead. And that's kind of my reset. So that was just a comment. The thing I want to dig deeper with you, though, is this. So I didn't find it silly, or I didn't find it out of place at all when you said you're running on the trails in the woods and you feel like you become part of the forest. And I always go back. So I spent 13 years working in a wilderness program for at-risk kids.
That's right.
And so as part of that, well, it's been years ago now, but I picked up this book, Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. And Richard Louv's been a big proponent for years on this nature deficit disorder, this idea that our kids aren't spending near enough time outdoors. And he wrote that before we ever started having conversations about how much time they're spending on their screens. But one of the things he said in the book, which it just stuck with me, and especially since I have kids, he said one of the biggest problems with our kids not spending enough time outside is that what happens when they do spend time outside is they look at a tree and they wonder, well, where did that tree come from? And so they'll look up into the sky, and then they'll see the sun, and then they'll imagine broader planets. And he said by not being outside, their imaginations don't grow. And I kind of equate that to what you said, is I don't think they get an opportunity to discover that there's something bigger out there, that the world's bigger than I have thought. And one of the question in that is, so one of the things I've noticed in this space where we're all trapped, but the only thing we're really allowed to do is get out and walk or get out and go to parks. I've noticed a lot of people out walking and a lot of people running that never were doing it before. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity through running or just through this getting out and hiking, getting outside, for people to discover I am a part of something bigger. And maybe going back to this running and this capacity to love, maybe in discovering that we're part of something bigger, we get a little more compassion for that thing that's bigger, maybe get a little more driven to take care of this something that's bigger. I've talked a lot about that. What do you think?
You know, again, I hesitate to say it out loud because it sounds like a strange thing to say, but I have always felt that running alone through the woods makes me a more compassionate person. And it's very hard for me to explain that. And I think in one of our previous conversations, we talked about, I think you just asked me, how has running affected you as a teacher? And my answer was something along the lines of what I want to say now, which is that feeling, and I think the word that probably some people would use to describe it is sort of entering a flow state. And so I do want to be careful that I don't think it has to be running. I think it can be anything that allows someone to really enter into that state that some people describe as being so focused, but yet somehow at the same time not focused, that the concerns of all the concerns that our ego usually focuses on, right? All of the petty concerns and the superficial worries that we tend to carry around with us nonstop, those fall away, and we're in this state of total focus and yet somehow no focus at all. And again, I know that sounds like a contradiction, but I would imagine, for instance, my daughter, when she's engaged in the art that she loves, she feels it. Or I imagine that someone playing a musical instrument would feel it. I think when we're in that state, and for me, as someone who's not particularly musical or artistic in that way, although I have gotten there as a writer, I have experienced that when I'm in the flow of writing. But running is a daily accessible way for me to get there more regularly and reliably. I am much less concerned about myself. I'm just not in my own mind as much. and so much of my daily regular, ultimately unworthy concerns fall by the wayside. And so I become more open to the idea of something larger than myself, which I think anytime we open ourselves up to that, we have the opportunity to become more compassionate, because we're not as self-centered. We're moving away from our usual load of self-centered concerns and into a place where we're more open to the world around us, which of course, for all of us living in any kind of family or community, is the people that we see each day, the people that we need to care for and nurture. So as a teacher, that ability to, on a daily basis, leave my self-centered concerns by the wayside and feel as if I'm part of something bigger, that's really, I believe, helped me to, when I'm at school and I'm actively with my students, to have compassion in a way that I'm not sure I would if I didn't on a regular basis have that experience of letting go of my self-centered concerns. And that sounds harsh, to act as if everything I would worry about that has to do with me is self-centered. I don't mean it in a way that's too self-critical, but I do think it's very valuable to be able to have those experiences where we widen, we broaden, we become more than our little minute selves with our own small concerns.
Well, I'm one who believes, and I do believe it, and I know not everybody believes that, but I believe we are created to be 100% mindful of others. I don't believe we're supposed to spend any time looking out for our own self-interest. Now, I know that's a crazy thing to put out there, but but I will say this, it does nothing to dissuade me when we get into situations like this, although not by our own design, we've kind of ended up here, where suddenly we have to look out for others. And I can't help but notice every time we get in a spot where people start spending more time looking outside themselves into others, there just becomes a happier air around. There becomes a more fulfilled air around. I'm fairly active on social media. The whole aura of social media changes when we're in times like this and when social media turns into, let me honor the folks that are serving others. Let me honor the folks that are out there doing heroic things, just in terms of, when social media is suddenly honoring the grocery clerks,
Yes.
nurses, the folks in restaurants that are, losing money, but staying open just to make sure people can be fed. These are people who are serving others. And that's not typically that's
What we
not
value.
Not valued. That's certainly not what we talk about. Social media is, a lot of times, and I'll call myself guilty, is a look at me, look at what I'm doing. And that's the ego in all of us jumping in. And I think we're in a very humbling time. And I've said it a few times. We can either choose to be humble about this or be humbled. Either way, it doesn't really matter. We're in a humbled place where all of the things we used to attach our ego to, they're not there anymore. And that goes back to the whole running thing. If your love for running was built on this love for races and this love for collecting medals and this love for, the fanfare that went with the finish line and all of those things I've experienced and enjoyed, but if that's all it was to you, you're in a tough spot now as a runner to find any joy or any fulfillment, which is, why I hope two things. Folks who maybe that was it, they'll be able to rediscover some love for the sport. And then one of the encouraging things is, and I just noticed the other day online, I happened to join this group. It was like an ad that came up, or it was like, here's a group you might be interested in. And it was runners helping runners. That was the group. So it was kind of new runners, and here's where you could go in and help each other out. And I don't know, I've been in there 3 or 4 days, but every day you get a notification of all the new people who've joined the group. And there's like hundreds of people joining every day. So I know there's a lot of folks out there, one, experimenting with this whole thing running, and two, the fact that they're joining this group must mean they must be finding something in it. And I tell people that all the time. That was the unexpected find for me in running, was community. I never no and that's because nobody ever talked about community.
Right.
Talked about running. Running was always a way to lose weight. Running was always a way to get in shape. It was a way to, fix your bad heart. Nobody ever said anything to me. Running's a place for you to find all your best friends in the world. But when I see these groups growing, I'm hopeful that, and that's running parallel to this situation we're in. I think people are rediscovering, like you said, the value of community that places like Louisa already understand. Some of these communities already have a I got your back mentality. So this is just a new flavor of I've got your back. But
Right.
hopefully this running, folks experimenting with it, dabbing their toes in it, hopefully they'll discover that power of community. And two, I hope that some of us who've already have that will invite those folks in and embrace this, experiment they're doing.
Right. I think there's also a side of running that has to do with struggle. And of course it's a struggle that we choose, that and I have to be careful so I don't sound like someone who loves pain, who wants, what most people see as a terrible punishment from some long ago gym class. But there is value in struggling and getting uncomfortable. And I think maybe some of these folks who are new to running, maybe part of it is that right now we're all feeling this shared struggle, because, and of course there's a scale of this, but all of us to some extent are dealing with challenges and difficulties right now in our lives and in our families. And that's not a struggle that we can avoid. That's been put in front of us and we're coping with it. But that struggle gives us a sense of purpose. And I wouldn't wish, this virus on, obviously this is not, I'm not, again, my fear of sounding like a Pollyanna, I'm not trying to praise this virus or what it's doing to us as a society. At the same time, I know from running that to struggle a bit, to feel uncomfortable, to continue through that, and to learn how to not be afraid of it, to face that fear of discomfort and pain and the unknown, and to survive it, is strengthening. And so maybe some people are embracing the part of running that enables us to choose a little bit of struggle each day as a way to find out, I don't want to use the word practice, but to find out what we're made of, to find out that we can be afraid and that we can be uncomfortable, and yet we will get over that hill. We will get through that and find that on the other side of it, we are more powerful than we thought we were. Those are feelings that I think we need right now. We need to know our own power. We need to feel as if we can overcome. We need to know that we can handle some discomfort.
Yeah, I think, we could go a lot of ways with that, but I always say, when I talk about the first marathon I ran, which at that time was the hardest thing I'd ever taken on in my life. It hurt almost the whole way. It defined struggle. But I tell folks, when I crossed the finish line of that marathon, I didn't spend much time thinking about what I just did before I started thinking about, holy cow, what am I capable of doing? It
Right.
it opened this door to what is possible, because trust me, a year before running that marathon, a marathon was not possible in my mind. I never
Right.
in a million years. Um, if I hadn't run that marathon, I would have never been in Honduras. And that's the big reason, because, like I said, I was always comfortable being within the borders of this country. This was where it was safe. And this is where I wouldn't have to struggle much. So to think about going to a developing country like Honduras, and against all of the images you get on television and the stories you read about the safety and all of the things that go with that, that absolutely happened because of the practice with struggle that I got in running. And I am sure, and like you, I don't want to sit here for a minute and minimize any of the struggles that people are going through right now. But I also know a year down the road, 2 years down the road, some people that are going through some really hard times right now are going to look back and be grateful for this time. They're going to learn some things in this time. It's going to reframe some next steps or priorities in life that completely, like you talked about earlier, is it going to change jobs? I've seen so many people already taking chances in life I never thought they would, most of it through social media, whether they're sharing some art, they're writing things, people putting videos out there they never would have. But I see people in this struggle being more willing to take some steps that I think are going to just redefine, the way they do life and think about life. And so again, I don't say that to wish struggle on anybody or wish this hardship, but I wrote a little bit this morning and did videos recently of, I've had some dark days in my life, but where I am today, I'm far more grateful for those dark times than I am all the easy days, because it was those dark times that taught me some things that, make me who I am today. I wish I'd have made some different decisions along the way. I'm sorry about, people I hurt along the way, but in that struggle, man, there were a lot of lessons I never would have learned, and I didn't learn. And in some of the days where life was pretty easy and I was taking advantage of some of the privileges I had in life, none of those things taught me near as much as the struggle. And that's always this parallel with running.
Absolutely. And I am on the same page with you about life circumstances, experiences that I've had that were, by anyone's measure, really awful. And yet being able to stand up again and move forward and have that reframing, that opportunity to reframe after the experience, changed me in ways that have put me where I am right now. And obviously, if those experiences hadn't happened and I hadn't reframed, I would be on another path, and maybe I would be just as grateful for that path. But I really do believe that struggle it's not something that's in the way, it is the way. Struggle isn't an obstacle that we're meant to get beyond so that then we can get to the better part of life. Life is struggle. This is the way.
Yeah, I say that all the time, this whole American dream thing. And again, I don't want to, people will disagree with me on it, but in a lot of ways, the whole idea of what the American dream is has, limited a lot of people. And it's limited because get to believing a lot of things are going to make us happy that aren't going to make us happy. And I talk with my boys about that all the time, that life is, you want to be happy, get good at overcoming the struggles that are coming your way. Don't be thinking about how not to have struggles because that's how I'm going to be happy, because that's not a real life. It's not out there anyway. So if you want your best chance at being happy, start building a mindset and building practices that prepare you to take on the absolute struggles that are coming your way. 100% guaranteed. And I think that's where a lot of people, and I think in this time, there's a lot of people who are unhappy. And again, not to minimize any struggles anybody's going through, but there are a lot of people who are facing some struggles for the first time. And that's really hard. And if you've built a life and a philosophy built on, I want to avoid struggle, this time is a lot more challenging for folks like that. And again, I think that's where running's helpful, or anything you take on that's a challenging, endeavor, and it's going to be, and you actually go into it looking for the struggle of it.
Right.
I think it helps to start building this mindset in you that struggle's not a bad thing. Like you said, I love what you just said. It's the way. It's not, a hurdle in life. Struggle is the way in life. And the more you take it on, I think the more doors open up in life. Go ahead.
Well, you heard that small intake of breath. I feel so bad that I can see you and you can't see me. But no, I was just going to make sure it's clear, because I know exactly what you're saying and I know what I'm trying to say. And I don't believe either of us are saying embrace struggle in that cliched sense of toughen up.
Right.
To toughen up. I think we're both saying embrace struggle because it's the way to be a compassionate, purposeful member of humanity. Because embracing struggle and understanding that it's not something to be avoided means that you're willing to engage and to hopefully become a person who feels empathy for others, who feels compassion and wants to be a part of a community where people feel empathy and compassion for each other. And I realize we've circled all the way back to Louisa County with that comment, but
well, and it is a good place, and I'm glad we did circle back there, because so how it isn't like you just woke up one day and said, hey, I want to connect my running with scholarships. So where did your own struggles, or where did your awareness of struggle, how did that sort of fuel this desire to run to raise scholarship for some of the kids in Louisa there who, and we've talked before, these are kids are absolutely capable of being college students, but they just don't have the opportunity. So how did this relationship you have with struggle fuel your desire to enter into those kids' struggle?
Gosh, I feel like there's a lot of ways to come at that answer. First of all, maybe it's important to say that I really began running because I was a teacher and because I saw my students struggling. So it was seeing students, especially students who had very real lifelong struggles with writing and reading. So students who writing and reading did not come naturally to them. And even as high school students, they found the act of reading even a short passage or writing a short essay to be very difficult. And though those came naturally to me, those are probably the only things I was really good at school. So I couldn't connect in that sense. I do remember thinking, oh, they're looking at letters the way I look at numbers, in other words, with fear and confusion. and maybe a different road I could have taken would be if I had decided to take on the challenge of actually understanding math. I did not go down that road. Instead, I, very consciously thought, what could I do? What can I do to feel what they're feeling, to have that experience of struggle, to truly be able to empathize with them and not just look at them from my post as a teacher, who has always been able to read and write very naturally and with ease. What can I do? And for a variety of kind of random reasons, some other things and conversations I was having in my life, I had thought around that same time, I wonder if I could go for a short run. And that feeling, that thought of maybe I should try running had popped up numerous times in my life, actually. Like every 5 years. I think that actually is something that a lot of people have. Every 5 years or so, maybe I should go off the couch. And it was a very similar feeling that I'd had before, and nothing had ever really come out of it. But it just happened to come at a time when I had a particular group of students who were struggling in a way that I really wanted to empathize with. And I was at the same time going home and doing these little laps around the track. And I did begin to feel like we were in something together, that my difficulty in just running a few laps, and it was difficult. And of course, as I added more mileage, it became even more difficult. That was equivalent in some way to the struggle that they were going through. And then to watch their persistence. And there's one student in particular I'm thinking of at this moment who had to pass the state reading test that's required for graduation. And she took that test and failed it over and over and over again, and ultimately passed it and improved her score so dramatically from the initial time she'd taken it. But it literally took hours and hours and hours of note taking. So when she actually passed that test, the way she did it was she sat in a room with the test for 9-10 hours and took notes on every single piece of writing. So every passage in this test, she took notes and essentially translated it into her own phrasing. And it took a full workday and then a few more hours to do that. And she was willing to, even though it must have been just incredibly frustrating and I would think uncomfortable, boring, probably a bit humiliating that her peers were able to take this test and pass, the first time without that level of effort. And a marathon side by side with that seemed about right. If she could do that, then I could certainly run a marathon. And then, as you know, it just went from there. And what is a marathon to you 1 year, 5 years later, you have to go a lot further to equal that. So eventually I just got to a place where to get to that real place of struggle required running what to most people would be an insane distance. And I think a lot of long distance runners can relate to that idea that, so for instance, in a marathon, there are people who've done it a few times, taken on that challenge a few times. I think most can understand the idea that the race doesn't really start until mile 20, right? You have to get to a level of discomfort and struggle before you really are face to face with your core, with who you think you are and who you could become. You have to run pretty far to get to that turning point, that transformative place. I think my student had that kind of transformation. And I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. She didn't choose to take, I'm sure if she had been given the option, she would not have chosen to spend an entire day working on that test. So maybe it's not a perfectly even comparison. But there is this potential for transformation that happens when we go to a place that we don't think we can go to, and we see ourselves, we see the limit, what we believe is the limit of our potential, and we push beyond it. And so part of the reason I keep increasing my mileage is because I've needed to go a little bit further each time to get to that place where I see what I believe is my limit, and then have the deep transformative satisfaction of getting to the other side of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's beauty in just focusing on that transformation. I say it all the time with me and running. I'm never winning a race unless I'm the only person in it. You know, speed and trophies, it's just not it. But I keep doing it because I just remain really, really curious about my limits, like you just said. I think I'm addicted to experiencing that transformation, like you're talking about. And I tell people all the time, I'm still not like in love with running. You know, it's still not this thing where I just love getting out there every day, and I'm every minute I'm out there, boy, I'm glad I'm out here. But I'm not sure there's ever been a run where at the end of it, I said, boy, I wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah, no. And that's
it's a 100%. And I think that goes back to that transformation. Some days maybe it's just a small thing. It transformed me from this attitude of, man, I don't want to do it, to, hey, I'm glad I did that. And then some days, you know, there are bigger things that happen out there, like this whole idea. I think I want to go to Honduras. You know, there's really transformative things that happen. So one of the things I want to ask then too, because in watching this year's version of your big run, and, you know, the scene coming up the steps there at the state capitol, the band's playing, and there were a lot of students there. How close have they got to really being able to relate to this challenge you take on and do that? And how much do they see some of their own challenges in you climbing those steps and arms raised to the Rocky theme? How you can relate to them well now? How well can they relate to what you're doing on sort of for them and with them?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that I'll never know, but I hope that we've done a good job in expressing to the kids that it's a metaphor, that even though, yes, there's Miss Fletcher as an athlete, and I think they see me as an athlete. I think even more than that, they see me as someone who is taking on something that seems too big, too hard. And I hope they see me as each year a person who's a little bit humbled and uncertain. I hope they don't think that I'm there at the starting line, because I'm not, believing, oh, I got this in the bag, this is easy, this isn't, you know. I hope they do see the uncertainty on my face, because it's definitely there. Every time I start these runs, I am not entirely sure I'll be able to complete them. I don't feel, and we talked about this a lot actually last time, you were surprised that after running the 100 miles, I was so nervous about the much shorter run to each school. But I definitely start each run with the the intention of finishing it, but the realization that it's going to be an enormous challenge. And so I hope my students recognize that, and then see that I struggle, which I do, and that not despite the struggle, but because of it, I end up at that finish line. And of course, it's not really a true finish line. It's one finish line with many more stretching on into the future. But I hope they see that I am humbled by the distance. I struggle greatly each time I take it on, and that I am incredibly grateful to find myself at the finish line each time, and that they see the joy on my face, because it is pure joy when I realize that I had that potential, that I have been able to stretch my limits further yet again with each run, and that they don't see that as something limited to runners. I mean, that would just be so much smaller than what I hope the run means to them. I hope they see it as relating to every aspect of their lives, and every aspect of their futures.
Yeah, when I saw that video, and so, I'm from around here, so in my mind, I can grasp running from Louisa to the Capitol steps, which I work right down there next to the Capitol. So I could understand the distance. I could understand the challenge of that. So to see you with that big smile running up those steps, like you just Uber had just dropped you off at the end of the walk, and you ran up there. You look remarkably fresh. It's a fresh that I just can't comprehend at the end of 50 miles.
It really is pure, absolute joy. And in the years that I've been doing this, because this was the fifth year of the Line Pride Run, it has been remarked upon many times, and by students as well, that I'm always smiling. That every photograph I'm smiling. When these runs would happen around the high school track, and the kids would come out of class to see me running, I was smiling. And I think you understand as a runner, and I know you may make a joke and say, but you don't smile when you run, and to each their own, but you will understand that I am uncomfortable. So it is a certain kind of joy. And I think it shows that joy and discomfort can exist together, right? That someone can be joyful as they struggle. Those two things don't have to be separate. It's not like there's the struggling part and then you overcome that part and you get to the joyful part. That the joy is that I'm genuinely loving the struggle. I'm no doubt uncomfortable, and I mean that physically. I mean, I have enormous blisters on my feet and my legs feel like cement. I mean that in a very physical sense, and mentally as well. I'm in like psychic pain. Like there are parts of me that desperately want to stop, and I'm tired, and I'm thinking of places I would rather be. But even with those kinds of physical and mental struggles, I am full of joy. I feel fully alive in those moments. So running up those Capitol steps, and I've seen that footage too, and I am confused by it as well when I see it, because I can see that it's a very genuine smile. I know my smiles, and I know that I am genuinely just bursting with happiness, and not just at the end. A lot of those smiles are happening, at mile 39 or mile 42, or in the case of the 100, mile 79 and 86.
Yeah.
All I can say is I feel so alive. Those smiles are the joy of being fully alive. And being fully alive includes struggle.
So I would say two things to that. One, it's not a joke. Anybody, and there's a few folks out there who will probably listen to this and they will be saying, no, he doesn't smile. He doesn't smile at all. But then I would add to that I am an example that just because somebody isn't smiling,
yes,
doesn't mean they aren't appreciating the struggle, that they aren't finding some joy in it, or that they aren't feeling fully alive. Sometimes a smile isn't the best indication of that, because
yes,
I do get out there and keep doing it. But no, there will be folks who just heard you say that, and they'll say, no, he doesn't. He absolutely does not smile. If there's a running, in fact, if there's a running picture of me that shows up with me smiling, it becomes a huge deal because it's such a rarity. But I get it. I absolutely get it. So how much money did you raise this year, or is this a running total you all keep, or is it each race has its own fundraising effort?
So we have raised about $70,000 total in these 5 years. And this year we raised approximately $18,000.
And what will that turn into then in terms of the number of kids that will get some help?
We have always played with the numbers in a way that makes the most sense for the students each year. So some years we have more applicants than others. Some years we have maybe 1 or 2 applicants in extreme need, and we're able to give them a higher percentage of the scholarship funds and maybe give smaller amounts to students who are receiving financial aid through other means. We've always been able to play with the numbers, and we work closely with the guidance department to make sure that the students who need the money the most are our primary recipients. And then the money also goes, not as much of it, but a portion of the money goes to support the newspaper and leadership classes because they need funding to continue to exist. And again, like I said at the beginning of this interview, it's those students in leadership and newspaper that really make it possible. Otherwise, it would just be a crazy lady running down the road in a tutu for no reason. So in order for them to continue to do the work that makes the run possible in the first place, they get a small amount of the money we raise. And then for the last few years, we've also been able to give a portion back to the community. So 2 years ago, we gave a portion of our funds to the Louisa County Resource Council and specifically earmarked it for the program that provides students with meals in the summertime, those students who during the school year get free and reduced lunch, which is about half the students in Louisa County. And then the following year, we gave it to an organization called Giving Words. And I know you know Eddie Brown.
Absolutely.
Is at the helm of that organization with his wife, Ginny. And they help single moms in the area who, of course, are providing for children in the community. So all of our funds go to helping the children of Louisa County, primarily through the scholarships that go to individuals who show that they embody the traits of the run. So students who show, and again, this goes back to the idea of the run as a metaphor, we're certainly not giving scholarships specifically to athletes or anything like that. The scholarships go to students who have persevered, endured, overcome obstacles, and been fully committed to whatever it is that they love and are passionate about. For some students, that's academics. For other students, it might be something they do even outside of school. But the goal is to give scholarship funds to students who have shown the qualities of the run in their own lives. And that's where most of the funds continue to go, with these other smaller portions going to support the community in other ways.
Yeah, so I want to wrap this up, but take kind of this ending you just had there and go back to your beginning. So then I want to kind of capture this a little bit, and then I'll let you close it with any closing thoughts you have. But I think I would summarize it with a challenge, and you kind of put this out there at the very beginning when we started talking about this opportunity we have to create, and we have an opportunity to structure something out of our life that makes a difference. And just a lot of the things you talked about on here, and it's why I love talking to you. talk about joy. I get a lot of joy out of my
Oh,
conversations with you, but it's because, and I want people to hear this, and I don't want it to get lost, because there's a lot of people right now who may not have a lot of things, but they do have some time. And a lot of times what happens, or what holds us back from using our time in a way that we think might make a difference, is this idea that it won't make a difference. This idea that, you know, what can little old me impact? And, I just want to remind folks in this conversation, you talked about taking up running as a way to, boy, just explore the challenges that your students were facing, as a way to just sort of connect with them, grow compassion for them. And then that turned into longer runs. And then that turns into this idea of, I think I want to run to raise some scholarship money, to, this whole community rallying around these runs and this effort, and these students, these leadership students that are helping coordinate this thing, to collecting $80,000, to giving words and giving back to the community. That, this all started with, I think I'll go run a little bit to try to better understand my students. And, for me, it's a faith component that I've really got better at in the last 5, 6, maybe even 10 years. I've let go that I'm not even in charge of the outcome, but I am in charge of doing something that somebody can create an outcome out of. I think too many times what held me back is I had an outcome in mind, and I tried to do something and not get there. But like this running and ending up in Honduras, I never could have scripted that. All I could do is start doing things that might someday end up being a happily ever after I could never even have imagined. And I would guess that when you started doing those short little runs, and maybe even when you said, I want to try to raise some scholarship money, that you probably couldn't have created an outcome in your mind that had you running up the steps of the Capitol to the Rocky theme, and a band playing, and senators waiting, and you speaking at a podium. And I just say all that to people out there right now who, one, have this resource of time. And that's not everybody. Again, trust me, I know that we got first responders out there that are working more shifts than they ever have. But in a broader scale, I interact with a lot of people who are talking about, I have time. And I hope people have more of a drive or a heart for, in this time, trying to make a difference. And I just hope our conversation, if nothing else, opens people up to the possibility that they can use this time to make a bigger difference than maybe they think they can. And sometimes it's not even figuring out what that difference is going to look like, because sometimes it turns out to be something far different than we could imagine. But it all starts with, and going back to that running analogy, it all starts with, putting the shoes on and trying to take a few steps, and just seeing, maybe just how far you can go with it. And, sometimes the finish lines turn out being something way, way different than we could have imagined. But, when you look back at it and kind of trace it, it's like, wow, this just started with this. And I just recapped this thing, $70,000, $80,000, and I'm giving back to kind of helping kids that maybe can't eat, and giving words who supports these moms. And so I say that as a challenge, and then I say it also as a way to just really admire who you are and what you do, and how you rally a community, and how you're an inspiration to a lot of folks.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to sort through my own thoughts about it. I don't know how this conversation came out. I have highlights in my mind of what we talked about, but I appreciate that you have this podcast that lets these conversations happen at all, because it's these conversations that help to more clearly draw the lines connecting these different parts of all of our lives. And I think it's worthwhile to make those connections. And so I appreciate that that's what you're doing with the podcast, that you're asking those connections to be drawn, and bringing them to light. Because even though obviously there's connections in my mind between teaching and running. They're not always apparent to me. And there's certainly no reason to believe they would be apparent to someone else unless you and I sit down and take the time to see them.
Well, I knew when we set a time for this, I knew I'd have to have a big window of time because our conversations always go long, and that's always a good thing. And to be honest, I had it wasn't like I just decided I'm gonna quit doing podcasts. It just, a gap became a really big gap, and then all of a sudden I wasn't doing them anymore. But to be honest, when my heart got stirred to doing them again when you did this run to the Capitol, I was like, okay, because I think I even told you we need to get together and record a podcast. And so I thank you for that. And so I will ask one more question. Has the joke been born yet that sort of inspired what's next year? Or are we still waiting on that joke?
Oh, yes. Two versions of the joke, actually. So there was one joke before COVID-19, pre-COVID-19. There was one joke that I was so very excited about, and I have not lost that excitement. And let's just say it involves a capital. Let's just leave it at that. I think anyone with an imagination can go where I'm going. But with COVID-19, there's also a post-COVID-19 little joke forming that takes into account that the structures of society that have been disrupted may still be disrupted a year from now, and that we may have to lower our expectations, especially in terms of what we could expect perhaps from police, because the escorts we had, and we didn't get a whole lot of time to talk about them, but the escorts that I had, the police escorts to the Capitol, were crucial. And I literally owe my life to all of them for keeping me safe through the night and into the next day. And if anyone takes a minute to imagine what it must be like to drive a police car at about 5 miles an hour for an entire day, or I should say an entire night, you can imagine how challenging that would have been for the 2 Louisa officers who stayed with me the entire time. So I had 2 officers who made sure I got safely from Louisa County High School to the Capitol building, going 5 miles an hour, approximately, all right, maybe 6 miles an hour, that entire time. And then we had additional police who came in each county, Hanover, Henrico, and then Richmond, who were absolutely a crucial part of making this possible. And so the plan that was brewing, that was the wildest plan yet, because each year our plans get crazier and crazier, involved a run to a capital that would have been further away and would have involved quite a bit of involvement would have required police for even more counties. And I just think that with the future so uncertain, and with police and firefighters and EMTs and all of those people so vital and essential during this time, I think it's not our place to speculate that something is non-essential, because it is, as the Line Pride Run would be able to happen in the midst of that. But we have a backup plan that I'm getting pretty fond of, that honors this period of lockdown and isolation in a way that I think is pretty funny. So I guess my hint would be, you may see me doing, for the first time ever, a Lion Pride run on a treadmill, which would be a test of my willpower beyond anything that I've done so far. Even running 100 miles around a track would not compare to the challenge of running a long distance on a treadmill, since I am one of those many runners who absolutely hates running on a treadmill. So I'll just leave it at that. I pretty much everything away. That was
No. Well,
give everything away.
obviously, it was funny before you even said anything. I was going to throw out there, what's next? The nation's capital, which that would be a logistical nightmare, I would think. But you all seem to find ways to pull those things off. And then even before, when you hinted that maybe we would either be in this same state or you want to honor this state we're in, I was going to throw out there that my buddy Greg, that you and I talked about this past weekend, ran 170 miles on a treadmill on what he called a $100 Craigslist treadmill. So
right, I looked at a picture of it after I saw that you had made that post on Facebook. I was curious about it. Yes, extremely impressive and absolutely relevant to what may become of Lion Pride 6 next year. But
I look
we
forward
always make
to
the
that.
most of it.
Oh, well, like I said, I'm a huge fan, and I look forward to seeing where we go with it. And I'm really grateful for the time. This is like all of our conversations. I look forward to going back and listening to it again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kate. It is always beyond a pleasure to get to sit down and have conversations like that with her. Obviously, they go much deeper than running. They dive headfirst really into life and the parallels and the connections, like she talked about, between running and life. And running's been meaningful in my life personally because of those connections. Nothing in life that I've experienced in terms of an activity seems to parallel the struggles and the lessons that we get out of life, like running. The lessons that I get from running, the struggles that I encounter in running, and then on the other side of those struggles, boom, this light comes on and there's just something beautiful on the other side of that. That really runs parallel with the narrative of my life, and that's why running more than anything else has become a pretty meaningful teacher in my life more than anything else. So thank you, Kate, for always letting me sit down and reflect on that connection and that parallel. Part of that parallel for me, before I sign off here, is my connection and partnership with Souls for Souls. So I encourage you to go to my Running for Souls website. That's running for the number 4 souls, as in the shoes. So running for souls, SOLES.com. Check out how you can get involved in, really, if you're a runner, turning some of the old shoes that you have into help for moms in developing countries. There's a lot of ways for us to reuse, really, in a helpful, compassionate way, these shoes and clothes that we no longer need. They can go to places where they can make just an incredible difference in people's lives, like we talked about in my conversation with Kate. We have no idea what these little steps we take can mean in the lives of people down the road, and in ways that we can't really begin to imagine. So this is all about my love for Souls, how running can help further the cause that they have, and turning our shoes and clothes that we no longer want or need into help around the world. So I encourage you to go to runningforsouls.com and check out how you possibly could help, especially in this time when maybe you don't have much time to do anything else, but go through your closet and check out, see if you have any old shoes. So I hope you all have a great day. Come back next time. Got another wonderful conversation to share with you down the road, and hang in there. I know times are tough, but like Kate talked about, the struggle isn't something that's in our way, it is the way. So embrace that struggle, search for the life lessons in there, and carry on and hang on. Talk to you soon.